So Jeb Bush has been on the campaign trail bragging about his economic record in Florida. So to give you an example of that, he said, "We made Florida #1 in job creation and #1 in small business creation. 1.3 million new jobs, 4.4% growth, higher family income. That is the record that turned this state around." Now, there's one major problem with his argument. It's false. So the Washington Post had a great article on this, and they say the following, quote, "As governor, Bush pursued a classic conservative economic strategy. He cut taxes and sought to limit regulations on businesses. Bush signed billions of dollars worth of state tax cuts into law, including temporary sales tax holidays and reductions in corporate taxes. His largest cuts were for taxes on investments. Critics said those cuts largely benefited the wealthy. Supporters said they helped unleash more economic activity, which boosted poor and middle-class workers. Bush also contracted out some state services to private companies, reduced the size of the state workforce, pushed limits on legal liability, and curbed regulations on private industry." Okay, so let's think about this. How could it possibly be that Jeb Bush essentially copied George W. Bush, who was doing the same thing at a federal level, but somehow at a federal level, it all came crumbling down with the subprime mortgage crisis and the Great Recession, and we saw that Bush's economic policy was horrendous. But Jeb Bush is saying, well, no, on a state level, I may have done the same things, but it worked on the state level. How can that be? Well, perhaps it's the case that, in fact, Jeb Bush's record also doesn't hold up to scrutiny, and his policies also didn't work, since they were the same policies as George W. Bush. So Washington Post explains. They say, "According to interviews with economists and a review of the data, Florida owed a substantial portion of its growth under Bush not to any state policies, but to a massive and unsustainable housing bubble, one that ultimately benefited rich investors at the expense of middle-class families." They continue, "The bubble, one of the biggest in the nation, drove up home prices and had many short-term benefits for the state, spurring construction, spending, and jobs. But the collapse of the housing bubble as Bush left office in 2007 sent Florida into a recession deeper than that in the rest of the country, and hundreds of thousands lost their homes." Ah, so I see what happened. Look at what Jeb Bush did, and I can't believe he's bragging about it. So he was in office for 8 years. He got out of office in 2007. When did the subprime mortgage crisis and the Great Recession start? 2008. So he says, what? It wasn't my policies. I wasn't in office when there was a crash. You can't blame me. You can't blame, my brother either at a federal level. It's not us. I mean, look, when I left in 2007, the numbers were great for the economy. I just told you what the numbers were. 4.4% growth, higher family income, more houses being built. But jackass, the second you left, there was a crash, a gigantic crash in Florida. They fared worse in Florida than in the rest of the country. So your economic record is not better than everybody else's. It's worse because you had the biggest bubble, which then burst. You have to understand, guys, this is what progressives and liberals and economists have known for the longest time when it comes to right-wing economic policies. It's not like they implement their policies and, from day one, it's just, oh, woe is me, we're in a depression, we're going to stay in a depression, and that's how it's going to work forever. No, you got to take Ronald Reagan, for example. Perfect example. So he came into office, he cut taxes on the rich, he deregulated. What happened? First, you have the boom cycle, which everything takes off. Everybody's like, oh my God, this is great. The good times are going to last forever. Then you have what? The bust. It's boom-bust cycles when you implement Reaganomics, which is what he's doing here. Or you could call it voodoo economics or trickle-down economics, whichever terminology you like more, because it all refers to the same thing. Cutting taxes on the rich and deregulating. So, and it's not just, it's Reagan did it, okay. Also, George W. did it. Here we know Jeb did it on a smaller level, on a state level in Florida. But also, the Roaring '20s. People always forget. They talk about the Roaring '20s like, oh yeah, what a great time. It was fantastic. What followed the Roaring '20s? 1929, the stock market crash and the Great Depression. So what policies led to that? The exact same policies that Reagan pushed for and George W. Bush pushed for and Jeb Bush pushed for. But see, Jeb Bush is doing the equivalent of, like he was president up until 1928. He gets out of office in 28. The crash happens in 29, and he goes, what? It's not my policies that led to that, even though those are the exact policies that directly led to that. So it's amazing that he would come out and argue that my economic record, I was number one in the nation. My policies were perfect, even though it led to a bigger recession than any other state. The housing bubble was worse in Florida than anywhere else because you pursued right-wing economic policies. I mean, obviously you're living within a country that was doing it, so your brother was doing it at a federal level, at a national level, and you were doing it at the state level, which is why Florida was double fucked. So, I mean, look, you just have to be ignorant of history in order to try to argue that this is a positive. And if it's not ignorant of history, it's just you don't care about the macroeconomic situation and you don't care about how middle-class people and poor people are affected by your policies. It may just be that that's all, roadkill. That's off to the side. That's not in my mind. What I primarily care about is doing whatever my donors want me to do, doing whatever the corporations want me to do, doing whatever Wall Street wants me to do. And that means giving them more tax cuts. That means deregulating for them more. And if it just so happens that the middle class and the poor get fucked in the process, well, whatevs. It is what it is, man. So it's one of the two. Either, you primarily care about the donors and that other stuff that happens is just, in the back of your mind and you don't give a fuck, or you're totally ignorant of history. That's all it really boils down to. But what's hilarious is it's not even like he's taking his record and he's not bringing it up or downplaying it or, doing something that's more higher-minded in how he does the messaging and the wording around it. It's not even that. What he's doing is he's saying, it was good. My record was fantastic, even though it was his record which led to a bigger crash and a bigger problem.